Hello everyone. Welcome. I just thought I would record another video today because we were supposed to have a Rogue Trader session and we didn't. So I thought, hey, I'll just use the time to make more Rogue Trader videos because I'm well behind in that. So that's what I'm doing. The last video I made about Rogue Trader the Rogue Trader game was about the session where we only had two of our people and the captain had to be off the ship for a while. And then the two other main crewmates, who have my player characters, went to help this other ship and kill demons for them, and it was kind of epic. That's basically what happened. And I was going to go into a little bit of their trip through the warp after that, but then I didn't get to it because I came up with all this behind the DM screen stuff. So this episode, I'm going to start with some of what happened in Trip to the Warp, as best I can remember. I didn't write it down, and I'm starting now taking notes on that, but I didn't then, and I feel bad about that, but I was, it's kind of more spontaneous sort of thing. So, but I remember some of what happened, so I'll tell about that, and then we can get what happened when they got to Concordia, which is kind of interesting because I actually put a lot of effort into Concordia, and I'm kind of excited about it. Left Gendrup, and it took them about 5 weeks in the warp, I want to say, because they rolled really well on their table. The ship has a engine quirk where right before you have any voyage, you roll a d10, and if you get a good roll, it cuts your voyage down by a few weeks, but if you roll badly, it ends up being longer by a few weeks, and they end up getting theirs cut down. So one of the few things that happened was I rolled on the warp table, visitations in the warp, and had, then the first time I rolled that one, I put someone that Howdred had killed, and someone that the captain had killed, because that was who I knew, and I didn't have anyone for Martyn warp touched. But then I was like, aha, I have a thing. So when visitations happened this time around, I was like, okay, focus. And it came up as a childhood best friend who he'd forgotten about, who had known him when she was young, and they were both, young. He'd actually eaten her body, and he was stuck in the warp. So I kind of played off of that a little bit. It was interesting, right? So that happened. And then they had another demon incursion on the ship. This one was actually kind of interesting. It was Demon of Slaanesh, specifically. And it would happen because one of their younger crew members had a wet dream, basically. And they were in the warp, and the Gallifloid's flux just wrong, and a Demon of Slaanesh came through. And they had to fight it. And the captain actually managed to blow its brains out with her bolter. And Martyn actually really was trying to start rumors about the captain, kind of like how badass and awesome she was. And so he kept telling people about how she defeated Forward in a gunfight when they were in Renthok, which is actually mostly true. And then when she took down this one demon, it was super cool and badass, and it enhanced her reputation even more. I think this was also the voyage where they had the voices telling them that they should eat toast. Basically, there's one of the rolls on the table, so random voices in the warp, and so I had this thing like it wanted toast, because sometimes the random voices are just random, and they're not, like the last time before when they did random voices, I had it tell them they should have gone to Concordia, but they were to go into Concordia after it was. So afterward, I was like, what, this one's not going to be, prophetic, vaguely prophetic. It's actually just going to be random. So the voices wanted toast, and then Martyn took that and started messaging Howdred mentally about wanting toast just to screw with his head, because Martyn just does that, and it's kind of interesting. So after many days in the warp getting into shenanigans, they arrive around Concordia. Now, Concordia is a fun planet. It's an agri-world, and their main export is product for curly hair, like nutrient oils and stuff to make, conditioner. That's their export. They also export certain food crops and other stuff, but that's their main thing. They have a PDF, Planetary Defense Force. There's a bunch of different ethnic groups, and each has their own king, and they have countries. At certain points, various kings become the High King through bloodlines or various things. I didn't actually go into detail about that, except the Hessians. And then the Hessians had mounted a rebellion because they thought the most recent High King was illegitimate. And to put down that rebellion, he wanted to get a bunch of flyers, intra-atmospheric planes that can go in and out of the atmosphere that could surround the planet and try to create a buffer zone. Also, some other war equipment. So what he did was he had gone off-world and asked him, a local noble family that had, very powerful business connections to a lot of planets in the sector, the Humperdinck family, because, yeah, to help him out. And so he had married a daughter of the Humperdinck family. And he had put her brother in charge of the PDF, and because he knew how to do all the stuff with flyers. So also Concordia, the entire population of Concordia tends to be quite dark skinned because it's a very strong sun. So and the Humperdinck family not so much. So they were basically the only two white people on this entire planet. And yeah, that was a thing. Also, fun fact: Felicia Humperdinck was born as Felic Humperdinck and was trans, and she changed her name and transitioned basically. And but she'd gone with her sisters to meet with this guy. But she assumed that he wouldn't pick the trans sister of all, so she could have, but he really loved her. The only problem with that was that she couldn't bear children, which is fine usually, but in a monarchy, that's kind of a big deal. But he had a cousin whose great grandfather had abdicated, but was in the same bloodline, and he had Felicia's brother, who he was bringing in to run the PDF anyway, marry her and produce heirs, and it was a whole thing. Now this is particularly important for later in the whole arc. First thing they do is they meet with Colonel Humperdinck and Cameron Humperdinck, as it were, and he boxes in. They see all these flyers. They don't have guns, but they're in a sort of protective maneuver, and they say, we're here to investigate Tales of Xenos from this Inquisitor told us to, because Inquisitor Del Smith had heard rumors of something going weird happening on Concordia and wanted to investigate. The Civil War wasn't a big deal because both sides supported the Emperor, so it was kind of like, you figure it out. But the High King does serve as planetary governor. And someone in her retinue had come from Concordia and had been concerned about certain things that were going on, and which no one else was concerned about for various reasons. So had brought it to her attention, and she'd been like, didn't feel like dealing with it herself, so she had sent in these rogue traders. This is fairly standard for Inquisitor Del Smith, and seems to be what happens to these guys a lot. Simply it's a very useful plot device as a DM, as a GM rather, and yeah, as a GM, and it is because it allows me to bring in all sorts of interesting things for them to do and not just kind of wander aimlessly. And it kind of makes sense because Inquisitors are the highfalutin. They have a lot on their plate. They're trying to deal with every domestic threat ever, and if someone wants them to investigate something random, they probably have 10 other things to investigate. So if they can kind of push off some of the things they don't think are as important, that would be a thing they totally would do. Hence, them using the rogue traders as kind of extra investigators. So, Inquisitor Del Smith tells them to go to Concordia, and they capture slave traders who are selling slaves to Xenos, also based on Concordia. They capture the Eldar. He tells them Concordia is his base of operations. He's using psychic powers. Dark Eldar don't usually do that. It's a whole thing. So they show up to Concordia, and they meet with the High King. He suggests that there is something going on in this one continent that's been flooded out and destroyed. They agree to go and take a look at it, and they settle in for the night. Martyn actually asks the High King about his policy on mutants. He's like, oh yeah, they're burned at the stake, obviously, because that's the proper Imperial response, and Martyn actually manages to convince him to hand over the mutant they were about to burn, named Asha, who's a girl who's developed the face of a dog. She's 6, so she really doesn't do anything, but she's there. And they also meet with a young servant girl, and I roleplayed the shit out of that young servant girl, and I still don't know her name. And she ended up figuring out about Martyn's mutation because he had to ask her to bring him raw meat because of his one of the mutations is necrophage, that he needs raw meat to survive. And worked her as like a likable little girl because I'm good at that, apparently. The High King sends an emissary to the rebel leader, and they do mention that there is a compound that someone's occupying, but they haven't actually looked into it because the people who occupy don't hurt them. And so the crew go out to investigate that compound, which this video is running long. So what I'm going to do is make this part 8 of that time in Rogue Trader, and then part 9 I'm going to tell you about the assault on the compound and what happened after, and all the other crazy stuff that went down with why the history of the Hubbarding family became important later. But for now, I think that's everything. Thank you very much for watching. Love you guys. Hopefully the next video is not too long coming.